sequence events from pen testing GraphQL applications at scale on the wild internet. And in the third part, we'll analyze the vulnerabilities that we found by pen testing GraphQL applications at scale. Okay. And just after, we'll have some bonus with some cool open source stuff for both hackers and developers if you're interested into that, especially for BSides New York. Okay, so I'm Tristan. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Escape, an API security company. I'm an ex researcher in artificial intelligence applied to cybersecurity. I got hacked myself, so I decided to start a cybersecurity startup. And I'm here today with my co-founder, Antoine.
Hi, nice to meet you. So I am Antoine, the co-founder and CTO of Escape. I graduated from UC Berkeley with Tristan, and I'm a passionate open source contributor. Hence, if we have time, we'll discuss a bit about open source in VM. And also, this is very particular because not common in the cybersecurity space. I'm a huge Apple fan and a former Apple employee too.
Okay, just a quick word about Escape before we diving into the topic. So Escape is an API security platform. We help security team discover and secure all their exposed single-page app and APIs without the need for any complex integration or deep network access. So scalability and time to value is our focus. We do API discovery, so generating API documentation, finding and prioritizing security vulnerabilities, and then we assist with remediation within the software development lifecycle. We publish a lot of research. So we published the State of Public APIs 2023 that you can find online. We also did a lot of research on exposed secrets on the internet, and we published especially the State of API Security, the API Security Secrets Pro last year. Today, we are presenting some exclusive research, which is the State of GraphQL Security 2024. So there is a full report from analyzing thousands of GraphQL APIs on the wild internet. You can find the full report for free using this QR code, which gives a bit more details on the research. Okay. For this study and for this research, we analyzed 160 production GraphQL APIs used by companies all through the world on the internet. It took us 98 scanning and computation hours to generate the result in this study. And we found more than 13,000 security alerts on those GraphQL APIs, which is about 87 security issues per GraphQL API, which is indeed a lot. So first of all, I will let Antoine present to you why is GraphQL so vulnerable? What is specific to this API technology that makes it so vulnerable to cyber attacks?
Thank you very much, Tristan. So indeed, GraphQL is a very specific language for APIs when the audience is familiar with GraphQL. Okay, so say like 30% of the audience, maybe?
Yeah.
So this is worth a quick refresher about GraphQL and what it is and why it is surging currently in the Fortune 500 companies. Actually, GraphQL, there is a huge GraphQL motion currently in enterprise because GraphQL has amazing capabilities that allows to put all your APIs together in one single endpoint, which is really convenient for front-end developments, for exposing your APIs and so on. And it happens that GraphQL is a full-featured language to query your APIs. This is a typical GraphQL query. This query, it has a depth, it has a width, but it also comes with very specific features. And every single of the feature here in the request, in the query, also comes with its own sets of potential vulnerabilities and security issues. And this is why GraphQL is so challenging to secure and causes that many security challenges currently in 2024. The second reason for GraphQL to be a challenge to secure is that GraphQL organizes all your resources as a graph. So especially, let's imagine you have a specific resource that you want to take care about at some very specific place in your graph. You not only have to make sure it is protected properly on one path, but on all the paths leading to this potential resource, and which makes access control in GraphQL actually a real nightmare. Okay, so this was a quick introduction to GraphQL. No, I think it is worth explaining how we managed to pen test production GraphQL API scales, and this will entail the conclusion and discoveries that Tristan will present afterwards. Okay, so the thing is that in this study, we really wanted to analyze production GraphQL APIs of real companies, of large companies. So it's 160 organizations that we scan here. And to that end, we built our own algorithm to do that, that intends to really assess the business logic of APIs. The thing is that with a classic vulnerability scanner, the requests that will be generated, actually, they will be stuck at the application validation layer, and hence they won't be able to assess the business logic of the API. They will just be random fuzzing on the variables, and they will make requests that does not make sense according to the business logic. So this is why at Escape we created a technology that is called feedback-driven API expression, which is a reinforcement learning techniques that really tries to understand how to explore the GraphQL graph smartly and to really assess all the path and the business logic behind the API. So this is a very simple example of a request that is being made by a classic scanner, a standard scanner. So we can see that the data might look maybe consistent according to the typing of the API, but the data is inconsistent regarding the real business logic of the API. Here, for example, with Escape, we are able to input real data that was previously found in the API, especially which is really important to user ID. We input a real email in the email fields and a potential password with an injections, and hence we are able to make sequences of requests that have a higher chance to test the business logic of an application. Again, I won't focus on that too much, but it is really challenging to test GraphQL API properly. Because of its graph natures, you have to make sure you test a maximum of path and the relevant path leading to different resources, and to explore all those paths recursively. So the algorithm by itself is detailed in a separate paper that I really encourage you to take a look at. It's available on the internet, so feel free. If you want more details, I would be happy to answer them on LinkedIn too, answer a question on the reinforcement learning algorithm. Now I will let Tristan introduce you like the main findings we had by using this algorithm on production GraphQL APIs on the internet.
Thank you, Antoine. So indeed, we deployed this algorithm and this architecture at scale in order to be able to scan a massive amount of GraphQL applications and have results that are statistically significant. So what did we find in this whole study? We found 30,720 security issues on those GraphQL endpoints. Among them, more than 4,000 were highly critical, and that's 87 issues per GraphQL service. And for the record, this is 3 times the amount that we found in our previous study in 2023, which shows that not only companies are not catching up with GraphQL security, but the amount of new kind of vulnerabilities that appear in GraphQL is growing. What did we find? OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities. So in GraphQL, there is a massive amount of unrestricted resource consumption capabilities. There are a lot of mixed configurations. And then we have interesting vulnerabilities like broken function level authorization, BFLAs, server-side request forgeries, and unsafe consumption of APIs. So those are very deep technical problems, and we are going to take a look in details into what that means. The thing is, it's not because it's GraphQL that the classic APIs vulnerabilities have disappeared. Classic API vulnerabilities still exist in GraphQL apps. One of the big problems that we identified is that the GraphQL APIs are very verbose. When there is an error message, they send you a lot of information, a lot of details on what happens internally. Very often you will have, like, for instance, version numbers of packages that you're using, and then any attacker can quickly find on the internet if this package has a critical vulnerability. But it can even cause more problems in the context of GraphQL, because GraphQL is very often used as an aggregator, as a gateway for underlying APIs. And very often in those underlying APIs to communicate internally, you have like internal JWT tokens or credentials that are exchanged. And when there is an error at the top level GraphQL, the top level GraphQL instance will send back a stack trace with the internal token that often leads to internal access. This is a problem that we have identified several times. We also identified many access control issues, especially a lot of post request. The equivalent of post request in GraphQL is a mutation. A lot of mutations are accessible to any user, even without an authorization token, which can allow anyone on the internet to actually change the state of the database without requiring any specific access or authorization. Finally, injections are still there in GraphQL. We found 2 XML external entity injections in GraphQL APIs, and we found no less than 21 JWT tokens where we could inject none as an algorithm in the JWT and craft one out of nowhere to bypass authorization. So this is a very well-known vulnerability, and it can be shown that it also happens with GraphQL vulnerabilities. Okay, so those were the classic API vulnerabilities, but what about the things that are specific to GraphQL? The vulnerabilities that exist only in GraphQL and that are new to this technology. We found a lot. Especially, we found a lot of vulnerabilities related to 4 categories: API schema leak, denial of service, brute forcing, and one specific that is my favorite that is called GraphQL bombs, and that comes directly from the Escape security research team. Okay. The first one that is very common with GraphQL is the internal API schema leak. So GraphQL by default discloses the internal API schema to anyone on the internet. You can deactivate that, and most teams do. They do deactivate what is called the introspection, so the ability to understand what is inside of the GraphQL API. But there is a feature of GraphQL that when you make a typo in what you ask the server, it corrects you. So for instance, cannot query field create session on tip root mutation. Did you mean create session, create user, create file, or create image? And by doing that, the GraphQL API tells you actually a lot about what are the fields that are accessible internally. And guess what? We proved that by doing this, we can, exploiting this and fuzzing and getting the results, we can rebuild this whole schema, for instance, in a real life application that is exposed on the internet. So this is a real life use case. And there is a tiny open source tool called Clairvoyance that you can find on GitHub that allows you to automatically build back any GraphQL introspection simply with the field suggestion that is enabled in GraphQL servers. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is that in this specific case, since the schema was supposed to be hidden, the developers did not protect enough the features in their GraphQL API. And we found a mutation that was named update admin. And we could exploit it without needing any access token. So we could actually change the password of the admin user of this poor SaaS platform just because they forgot to add access control. Okay, so this allows access to unauthorized functions and easy compromission of the API. Second one is the denial of service. So in GraphQL, since it's a language, it's very similar to programming language. You have functions, which are called fragments. So fragments are a piece of logic that you can reuse across multiple queries, exactly like a function in normal programming. But what happens if you create a fragment that calls itself? Then you create an infinite recursive loop in the GraphQL server, and you can simply make it crash. So you create a denial of service. With a very simple request, you can create a full denial of service on a misconfigured GraphQL server and just crash it. And finally, brute forcing. So in GraphQL, there is a feature that allows multiple queries to be sent in one single HTTP request. This is very cool and can be used to batch queries and to get more data with limited network traffic. The problem is it can bypass the rate limitation at the HTTP level. So for instance, if you have a WAF that does HTTP rate limit, you can actually send one request that contains 1,000 attempts at login and password with 1,000 different combination of login and password. And you can use that to get access to an authorized account. Okay, so this can lead to stolen user accounts, sensitive data exfiltration, and denial of service. Okay, and the last one that comes from Escape's security research is the GraphQL bombs. So file upload in GraphQL is made using a combination of multi-platform data with a GraphQL query. And the GraphQL query references with a pointer the data in the multi-platform data. But now if you use the alias system that I mentioned before, and you make all alias point to the same file in the request, the GraphQL server will expand it X time, where X is the number of alias that you made. As a result, you can send a 2 megabytes request that will be expanded by the GraphQL server into a 1 gigabyte of data on the server side, because it will copy X times the file that you sent. So basically, you can just create a big denial of service by uploading a very small amount of requests and a very small data. So it create denial of service, unavailability, and storage saturation, basically, which are very big problems to solve. Okay, we've done an article on how we found about this vulnerability. So of course, the GraphQL bombs is inspired by the name zip bomb, which comes from the same idea of something that expands. Okay, we have done other reports on data exposure. We can come back on that later, and if you want to ask at the end of the talk, we can give you the link of those reports on the secrets board. So overall, if I conclude, we found that 33% of API services have highly critical vulnerabilities, and over 72% are vulnerable to at least medium-level issues. 69% of GraphQL endpoints are vulnerable to denial of service, which can be a single point of failure if you have used GraphQL as a single entry point for all your external APIs. And 80% of issues were actually resolvable by implementing best practices like access control with authorization and authentication, input validation, and rate limiting to block brute force attacks. So it really means that there is a lack of understanding by the development teams of the best practices specifically for GraphQL. Okay, little bonus before we conclude.
Yes, thank you very much, Hussein. Okay, so indeed at Escape, we love working on open source project. Every Friday in the company, actually, we commit to open source project, either existing project or we create our own projects too. And here we have some projects that are more dedicated to blue team and red team, and some for more developers and engineers. Who in the audience is a developer and creates applications? Almost nobody. Okay, very interesting. Oh, a few. Okay, 10% maybe of the audience. Okay, so there will be some tools here for developers, other for more the hacker side, we'll say. The first one is GraphQL Armor. So GraphQL Armor will allow you to basically prevent you and protect you from all the basic. It implements all the GraphQL good practices by default, and it will prevent most of the things we've seen earlier and Tristan presented earlier. So it's a fully open source project. It's really straightforward to install. We have almost 100,000 downloads per week now on the module. So very, very, very impressive. And it's implemented by design and by default by major companies such as ArongoDB, Neo4j, Redwood.js, and so on. So really quick win here for developers that want to create and build secure GraphQL applications. Okay, here is more for the, it's both for hackers and developers. They say it's a playground that shows how to exploit the vulnerabilities we've seen earlier, but also how to fix them with GraphQL Armor with different configuration parameters. So I won't enter that much into detail today, but know that GraphQL Armor is super customizable, and you can test those customization things through the playground we deliver on our repositories. Tristan already discussed about Clairvoyance. So this is the open source tools that allows to build back the specification from the GraphQL suggestion feature even when the GraphQL introspection is closed. So this is not an escape project, but we are maintainers of the project, and this is a really cool project to see how GraphQL works and so on. Feel free to contribute. It's a Python project. It's pretty easy to onboard on coding. GraphQL Voyager, we used it a couple of times during the presentation to show you the graph behind the GraphQL application. So this is also an open source tool that is also available for free online. So you just copy paste the introspection, for example, the one you've built back using Clairvoyance, and you can explore the application, which is extremely useful for developers to see which fields they can access to, but also for potential hackers that can see how to navigate the graph and access the information they want to access. Okay, a quick word about Goctopus. This is really interesting because I told you we've built the study on 160 GraphQL GraphQL application of famous companies, but how did we do that actually? We just inputted the domain name of those companies into Goctopus, and Goctopus allowed us to find the potential GraphQL API between a specific domain name. This is how we discover that some very famous company, they have a GraphQL API, they are using a GraphQL API in practice. And this is how we conducted the study and found the endpoints that were the matter of the study. Again, open source, this is in Go, pretty fun to work on. So feel free to take a look at it. Okay, one other cool stuff are the word lists. So this is extremely cool if you are trying to pen test a GraphQL application here, because with the word list, we had the 100 most common parameters in GraphQL applications. The same for the arguments, for the queries, mutation names, and so on. So really useful word list that you can input into your favorite tools like Birdsuite and something if you want to do brute forcing on GraphQL applications. So, okay, last but not least, what we call the GraphQL Academy. So this is also fully open source project, and what is really fun here is that it allows both if you are on the hacker side or on the developer side. It teaches you really the most common GraphQL security issues directly into your browser, and it uses web containers so that you don't even have to install Node.js or anything. Everything runs into your browser directly. So looking at the source code of it is pretty fun too. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending today this talk. We are Tristan and Antoine. Feel free, if you want to get access to the slide, to ask us some questions afterwards, to add us directly on LinkedIn. We'll be super happy to answer you. So thank you very much for your attention.